Welcome to today's webinar about preparing your students for their Cambridge English listening exam. So we're going to focus on listening today. So my name is Sarah Ellis and I work as the Senior Assessment Services Manager in Europe. And in fact, I'm talking to you today from Italy. So thank you for writing where you're from. And so I see other people from Italy too. So hello. Okay, so let's start. The webinar is going to be about preparing students for Cambridge English qualifications, the listening part, and we're going to focus particularly on some lesson ideas to develop your students' listening skills and to help them prepare. This session is really going to go back to basics. So we'll be looking at some of the methodology, which is common practice for preparing for developing listening skills. So this is a little overview of what we're going to cover. We're going to look at the challenges and opportunities of developing listening skills, because obviously many of you are working online and or remotely, but we also can consider the differences between face-to-face and learning online. A second part, we'll be looking at the listening skills that are tested in Cambridge English qualifications, and we'll take some example exam questions and have a look at those as we go along. Also, we hope to give you some lesson ideas, and I'll be showing you some of the brand new lesson plans for teachers, which you will be able to access after the webinar to help you with preparing for listening tests online and offline as well. So that's what we're going to do. And I want to ask you, if you can, if it's possible to have a piece of paper, or if you prefer to write on a digital device, that's fine too. But you'll need a paper to do a task that I'm going to give you. This part of the session is about tuning in, and I think it's important to also think about it from your student's point of view, that at the beginning of a lesson, if you like, you are tuning in, you're doing a sound check, two kinds of sound check, if you like. One is that they can physically hear you, but also that they get used to the sound of your voice. And they kind of tweak it in. Many of your students may have been studying another subject before they come to your lesson. So when they hear your voice at the beginning of the lesson, it's an opportunity, like for you, to get used to the teacher's voice and to kind of tune into thinking in English. This really will help the students be more relaxed, more prepared, and I think when you're listening, the more relaxed you are, obviously the more successful you're going to be able to process the information. So a very important part, I think, is how you set up the lesson at the beginning. Now, today I can't see you, but many of you may have platforms where you can see your students. And of course, one of the things you can do is ask questions at the beginning to help your students feel relaxed. So I've got 3 questions on the screen, just to make it easier. And I would ask my students to think about the question, so I can say the question to you. So who have you spoken today? So if you think about the answer to today, what did you speak about? And where and how did you communicate? Was it online? Was it a phone? Was it WhatsApp, etc.? So then I would obviously ask my students to respond. But again, it's a little, it's a kind of pre-lesson activity, but also a listening activity too. Of course, we have to help students cope with the audio and video on their machines, and we appreciate that sometimes this might be difficult, but of course it's important to just check at the beginning of lesson, particularly if you're going to do listening, that they can access the sound on their computer. Now, like any lesson, a warm-up is an important one. We're talking about warming up to my voice, but also warming up by doing some kind of activity, like a sport or playing an instrument. The more you warm up, the better you're going to be able to perform when you get to the next part. So this is where you need the piece of paper and a pen or a pencil, or if you prefer to write on a device, that's fine too. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to give you some sayings about teachers. and I'm going to dictate them to you. But before we do that, I've got 3 pictures on the screen, which are connected to those statements. And I wonder if you can look at the picture and think about any of the words that might be in what I'm going to dictate. So there's sayings about a teacher. Look at the picture. Have you any idea what vocabulary might be in the sentences I'm going to dictate? So I can see people writing in the chat. Thank you for that. Great. Okay, so if you're ready, I'm going to dictate the first saying. A teacher takes a hand. A teacher takes a hand. Opens a mind. Opens a mind. And touches a heart. And touches a heart. I'll say it again. A teacher takes a hand, opens a mind, and touches a heart. So hopefully you had time to write that. Now, for the sake of the webinar, I'm not going to dictate the other 2 because of for time reasons, but here are the second 2 as well. So at this point, obviously, your students could check their spelling. If you're dictating something like this to your students, they can check their spelling. You can show it on the whiteboard on your platform if you have one, or you could have it in a Google Doc if you're communicating in another way. So here we have 3 sayings about teachers. Now, in the class, I would, if you have the opportunity, put you into breakout rooms so that you can discuss these 3 sentences and decide which one you prefer. So perhaps you'd like to tell us which one you prefer, 1, 2, or 3. I haven't put the number, but you can see 1, 2, or 3. Which one do you prefer? Put it in the chat. Thank you. Okay, so that kind of activity is a way to obviously establish a quick, easy to do, non-tech activity that doesn't need a lot of preparation. If you're doing it with students, you might decide to dictate some questions. Like the 3 questions I showed you at the beginning, you might dictate them so that the students write the question and then go into breakout rooms and ask and answer the questions in the group. So you kind of start off very simple listening, but very hopefully engaging your students right from the beginning. So let's think about digital in listening in the digital classroom and some of the advantages and some of the challenges that we have with this. Now, some of you, I know from previous webinars, are using platforms such as Zoom, Skype Meeting, or Google Hangouts, or Microsoft Teams. And these allow you to play audio as if you were in a normal classroom. Which is obviously a fantastic situation. And in some ways, I think it's actually an advantage because, of course, perhaps your students are wearing headphones. They can adjust the volume, which, of course, they can't do in a standard classroom. So there are some advantages if your students are in a position to be able to do this. Some of you may, of course, not be able to play audio through your platform. And so you might need to send audio files via another means, perhaps WhatsApp, or you might create a group chat for your particular class, obviously depending on the age, and sending it to the learners that way. You may be able to get permission from your parents if you're teaching younger learners, so that they authorize you to send it that way. Of course, another way is one of my favorite tools is Padlet, and Padlet does have some free options. So you can also use Padlet to send files to your students. Obviously, everybody's situation here will be different, so I appreciate we need to look at different options. Can't assume that your students have headphones, or that they can use a computer. Maybe they're using it at home with other family members. So there are lots of considerations I appreciate that make it challenging. Of course, we've got the teacher. A teacher is a very important part of the listening lesson. Whether they, in this situation, of course, like me today, you're hearing my voice, and the teacher talking time, if you like, is listening this way. Of course, I can modify my language. I can make sure that I've got the level right for my particular students, which is an advantage. And if you like, it also means that I can use this connection to try and personalize, build up rapport by speaking and using my voice. I can grade my language, as I said, but it's important to remember that you don't want to just speak. It's not just about teacher talking time. We also want to encourage the students to speak as well, and so that the students are listening to other people, not just the teacher, which is also one of the reasons why, if you can, bringing audio files into your lesson means that they're going to get a wider range of listening. It's just to remember that too. Now, I've chosen to use some traffic lights as an analogy of our journey to developing listening skills with our students, because if you think about it, when you're at the traffic light, especially at stop, you kind of think about where you're going to go, perhaps think about how you're going to get there. You're doing a little bit of planning, if you like, and thinking about how you're going to get to your journey's end. And I think I thought this would be a useful analogy for us to use. So if we're at the stoplight, we, as teachers, I think it's important to stop and reflect on some of the challenges of developing listening skills. Also to make sure that we're well informed about what listening skills are actually tested in Cambridge English qualifications, and that we are confident about the different parts of the test as well. Obviously then we can help our students to be more confident as a result. So at that red light, let's have a little look at what makes listening challenging for students, and particularly challenging online. And if you'd like to write some words in the chat, what are some of those challenging things of doing listening online? Just write that in the chat, just a couple of words, perhaps your top 3. Okay, the chat is a bit delayed for me, so I can't. Technical difficulties, of course, are one of the biggest, and of course, we in some ways we need to make sure we have a plan B. Yes, absolutely, the technical is coming out a lot, and noise perhaps of the student's family or their situation. So there are some challenges that we need to consider. But let's have thinking about listening in general, not just online, but also offline or in a standard classroom. We can think of some of the challenges. I've listed a few. Concentration, I see in the chat. Yes, of course. How do you help your students concentrate is a very important one, and making sure that perhaps you break up your listening so that you engage them rather than just putting on a long video or putting on a long listening text and they're not doing anything, and they're just, you'll lose them because, of course, you've lost the benefit of being able to monitor them, especially if you can't see them, what they're doing. So we have to think of that. But here are some of those challenges. So have a look at those 3. I'm going to show you 6, and I'd like you to think about, in those that I've listed, which are your top 3 for your students. Think about your students. Which do you think are the most challenging for your students? And just put the numbers in the chat. Okay, somebody's put no, not enough practice. Yes, of course, there is a temptation not to do enough practice, and that's something, of course, we can control. 4, 5, 6. I've got 5. Okay, lots of different answers. So I think between us, probably some way or another, we all had experience of some of these challenges. And we want to look at answering some of those. So making sure that our students are not just feeling pressure about getting it right, that they have some kind of strategy to be able to approach a question. The worst one for me is that students often think they have to understand every word. And of course, that's because they haven't necessarily appreciated that they need to change the way they listen depending on what they're listening for. And maybe they've been traditionally using listening for perhaps grammar practice, where they need to understand everything rather than for developing listening skills, for example. We'll come back to some of those other points during the session. So what can we do to face these challenges? We just started talking about that now, so let's extend it. And for me, I think the biggest, as a teacher, I have to make sure that I concentrate on it, that I make sure my students are getting frequent practice in and out of class. In today's world, of course, we do have, in some countries, we have the benefit that some students are watching Netflix or perhaps using YouTube, and perhaps listening more than they were before. And so this can be, of course, an advantage. But as a teacher, I need to be thinking that my students should be doing lots of practice for listening, whether that's not just exam practice, of course. It's important that we focus on these sub-skills. And of course, this is what we'll have a look at, some of the ways to do that. And of course, listening is not just an isolated activity, and it's not just about taking a test. So I think finding ways to get our students to work together, to see listening as an activity that you can actually collaborate on, and of course not always under test conditions, because of course that's going to make people panic and perhaps not necessarily feel very successful. That's what I mean by reducing test anxiety is not by not just testing your students listening all the time, but it's also about making sure that they know what to expect, so that you reduce that test anxiety, because they've already have an idea of what's going to happen and how they can cope with it when they're in the test itself. So one of the things I think is fundamental is that we talk to students about listening skills. As teachers, of course, it's something, it's in our vocabulary, but I don't think it really is in students' vocabulary. So if we think about the main sub-skills of listening, can you just write them in the chat? Okay. I'm afraid I can't see the chat. It's a bit, there's a bit of delay. So thank you for your contribution. And I'll put my little list up. Thank you. Listening for details. It's coming through now. Comprehension, gist, exactly. Okay. So when we look at comprehension, we can break it down into those sub-skills of listening. And it's making sure that our students know that the way you listen will vary and that that's normal. They do it in their own language, but they're not thinking about it in English. So it is worth looking at and making sure that they've understood what these words are. Instead of just saying, oh, we have to listen for gist, and listen for specific information, what does that exactly mean? How do I do that? And so one of the things I like to do is to give students a kind of context and say, you put yourself in this context. How do you listen when you're in this context? So I've got 3 situations for you to have a look at. That's the first. This is the second. And of course, I've got some sub-skills for you to match them with. And this is the third. Great, fantastic. Now, of course, this just really illustrates from a student's point of view, in an easy, practical way, how do you listen? How does listening change for you in these different contexts? And then you kind of look at the vocabulary to describe that sub-skill. Here are the answers. Now, in the first one, Some people might have a slightly different answer to this one. If you think about just listening to your friend talking about their family, their holiday, and you think, oh, that's interesting. Yes, maybe you're listening for gist. If you suddenly start thinking, where did they stay? How did they get there? What time? Where did this person book their holiday? How did they travel? And you start listening in a more intensive way, then of course we've changed it from gist to listening for detail, and that would depend on your purpose. Am I just listening to the kind of, oh, how was your holiday? Maybe I go there one day, or oh, I'm thinking about going there. I need to listen more carefully. So it's interesting to get students thinking about the practical nature of listening. So let's have a look at the listening skills and how we can help develop it. The first thing to say is that, of course, we need to make sure that we're giving students a healthy diet of listening. So different types of listening, text, shorter, longer. Perhaps we get them to choose some listening texts as well, that they bring the text. Obviously, that would depend on the level of the students. Obviously, as soon as you start getting to B2 and above, and maybe even B1, you've got more opportunity to engage the students in bringing more material themselves. And obviously, we want them to be listening on a regular basis, not just once a week when they come to your lesson, or perhaps that they see listening as something that they can enjoy and that they can do outside. And thank you for the feedback about the healthy diet of listening. Yes, I do think it's a bit like a diet, but a healthy one, so that you are successful and become a very confident listener. I appreciate how much it is. I live in Italy, so I learned Italian, and I appreciate how important it is to listen. However experienced you are at a language, it's always you can always learn much more. So for students who perhaps are not living in the context, listening in the class and outside the class is going to be fundamental to create successful listeners. The more you listen, the better you get. Now, there's a little story that I'll tell you, which is in this. I don't know if you've ever heard of the famous opera house in Milan. The famous opera house in Milan is called La Scala. And the story goes like this. There was a little boy who was looking for La Scala. He wanted to go to La Scala, and he couldn't find the way. So he stopped a man, and he looked at the man. The man was quite a big man. He had a big voice. And he said to the man, who actually was Pavarotti, the famous opera singer, Pavarotti, he said to the man, so how do I go to La Scala? Or how do I get to La Scala? And Pavarotti turned around and said, practice, practice, practice. So in a way, I think it's a message about listening that, of course, the more confident you are, it's also due to how much you're listening, which is obviously logical. Let's have a look at synchronous, so listening together, so listening as a whole group, and asynchronous listening tasks. This is, of course, perhaps something that is a bit different because we're working online. We've got more opportunity to perhaps have this choice, but even when we go back to our face-to-face classrooms, we still have some of these choices, and there are benefits of both. So if I'm going to just ask you to write in the chat, what are some of the features of synchronous listening tasks? So, for example, here's an example. So when you're listening as a group or delivering your listening audio file, the listeners are all listening at the same time. What other features are there about synchronous listening tasks? Or if you'd like to write it in the chat. Okay, thank you. The teacher is in control. Well, that's see that many of you have some of the things that I've written. Obviously, everyone listens to the same material, so you know that your students are hearing the same thing and having the same experience. How they approach it may not be the same, but they're listening to the same thing. And the activities, of course, can be checked as a group. How you check them can be a bit more challenging. But the teacher is in control, as many of you said, and this can be obviously a benefit. You feel that you're able to manage the lesson, and the feedback can be given to others. Now, one of the challenges of online is how you give that feedback, and how do you make sure that everybody's actually doing the task? Well, one of the things, of course, is to actually use a digital device where they write the answer, or, of course, you can write simply in the chat. And also, you can just do something visual. So I like to have my signs. So I have my A, or I have my tick, depending on, I'm not sure if you can see that one, or my cross on another piece of paper, so that if you are able to see the students, then obviously a quick way to engage is that they show you their answer. They can just write it on a piece of paper. It doesn't have to be anything sophisticated. Of course, the advantage of asynchronous, so in other words, doing listening not all together, so the students are doing this individually, there are many advantages that we can have. One is, of course, that they can choose the material perhaps that's of interest to them. You might give them a choice: listen to this, or this, and they choose. Or you might say, find something to listen to and come back and tell us about it. Students themselves have more control. This is one of the wonders of technology, is that perhaps the fact that they can deal with the volume, that they can listen to it more times if they want to, helps them be less stressed and more confident. Of course, listening can be assigned as homework. We don't often assign listening as homework, but it may depend on what facilities you have. But of course, we can assign listening for homework as well. So I just wanted to sort of pause for a second and ask you about what you're doing. And we're going to launch a poll for you to take part in. And the poll should be appearing. And we'd like you to answer the question about whether you give students listening activities to do on their own, or do you do listening tasks as a whole group? So if you'd like to answer in the chat, on the poll, that would be great. Okay, so I can see you answering. Okay. Fantastic. And for those of you who prefer to see it on the screen, here are the questions. Here are the options I've given you. You can only choose one, I'm afraid. It's just the poll. Okay. So what I'm seeing here is that a lot of you are doing both. Which is great, of course. Many people are still preferring to do it as a whole class, and some people are not doing any listening, which, of course, is a disadvantage to your students, but there may be reasons why you're not able to do that. So having looked at some of the challenges and obviously considering online and offline activities, let's think about practicing and how we build that knowledge of listening skills, and make sure that we're practicing different skills so that they get the breadth of listening that they need to be able to do their Cambridge English listening tests successfully and comfortably. So I think it's useful to think about this is where we go back to basics, to think about the framework for listening lessons. And I think if we ask the question, what's the difference between teaching face-to-face and online? I think in terms of how we structure the actual lesson, it's probably going to be pretty similar. If you think about it, when you'll probably want to have some kind of lead-in to encourage the learners to actually want to listen, to motivate them to do the task you're going to give them. And maybe you want to activate their existing knowledge so that they're ready to listen. Might be that, and then you give them a task. So let's just have a look at that on the slide. So having a pre, while and post activity. So preparing them before they do the listening, and giving them a lead-in of some kind. then actually giving them a task. And here, I think one of the most important things is making sure that students understand what the task requires. And sometimes we take that for granted. And it may not be that they're having a problem with the listening, they're actually having a problem with the task. So I think that's also something to help them direct and focus what they're going to be listening to, so that they can complete the listening with the purpose of that task. And then, of course, post could be looking at the listening skill, or it might actually be a lead-in to some other kind of skills development, not just listening, or it might be some language work. We're not going to focus on that part so much. What we will do is look at pre-listening in particular, because I think that's a very important stage of helping your students to be successful in an exam. They feel prepared, they're more motivated, they're going to be less nervous, so they can actually listen and hear. Of course, we need to develop activities that will encourage them to actually start to use the question itself to do some of these things. So predict. Obviously, we need to activate their previous knowledge about the topic, particularly for younger learners who may not be doing that automatically, or perhaps for lower level students who are struggling with vocabulary, particularly A2 and B1. We might be looking at developing their vocabulary so that they are more equipped before they go into the listening task. Now, I've got some examples from Cambridge English qualifications, but many of although the levels may be different, many of the actual skills that we're developing through these tasks will be the same across the different levels. You will also find that many of the listening tasks are actually aligned, so you'll find the same task being found in each level. So you might see the same one task in A2, B1, and in B2. So that's also interesting, because as the students can build on their experience as they go step by step up the levels. So here we've got an exam task. So it's for A2, key for schools. Have a look at the task. What do the learners have to do? And what listening skills do they need to develop? Obviously, it's not too sophisticated. We're obviously at A2. So let's just have a look at a couple of points about this one. We have, what do they have to do? Well, they obviously have to look at the question and choose the correct answer based on a picture. It's worth thinking that using pictures helps the cognitive load, because, of course, if you have to listen and read a lot, then, are you testing reading or are you testing listening? So one of the reasons that you find tasks like this is considering, are we really testing listening, not testing their ability to read or write a long answer? So that's also an important thing when you're choosing materials. Here, of course, the skill that we're developing is listening for specific information. They're going to have to recognise some vocabulary about the pictures, and of course, they will be able to check it when they hear it the second time. Now, one of the things you can do, basic thing to do with students, is give them a little questionnaire or a little quiz about the question. And here's a very simple one. The students need to answer yes or no to these statements. So I'm sure you could do that really quickly in your head. Okay, and of course, I would then show the answers. So in this particular task, they hear more information than is shown in the picture. That's obviously part of being able to listen for specific information. And of course, you will hear about each of the pictures. And of course, that's a bit of exam technique, is don't just stop if you hear a word. It may not be the right one. You need to finish listening before you make your final choice. And of course, there will be distractors. And I think the understanding that this is part of the testing process is important. So don't just word spot, which can sometimes get you into trouble if you don't wait for the rest of the question. So very simple things. And if we look at this further, once we've done the task, of course, we have the opportunity to use the tape script. And I think it's something that, of course, it's worth mentioning that you can send the listening and the tape script, because you can download it from our website. You would be able to send this material to your students directly. Here we've asked the students to underline and focus on the vocabulary, which is obviously related to the pictures, and then obviously why they actually choose their answer. The clock one, for me, is a perfect example of a classic test where you will hear each three of the times, but we have to answer the question, what time does the art lesson start? So here we have to make sure the students are focusing on the question and thinking that they're finding the answer to that question. So very important. And of course, you'll see this task again in B1. So what they're learning in B2, the skills they're developing, will extend into B1. Now, if we look at listening part 2, we've got a task here, slightly different. You maybe not be able to read it very well, but you'll get what do they have to do? So if you could just about read the rubric, I think. And what listening skills do they need to develop? So, of course, they're listening for specific and detailed information. They're going to be listening for some kind of word or number. It says it in the question. So we've got a very clear task. And what can we do in terms of preparing? Now, obviously, we can, when we get closer to the exam, we're going to be doing the tasks as exam practice. But in developing the skills, it's useful to take the exam task, break it down, look at what can help them approach that task. So here are some very simple things. The task is about camping. So let's make sure we've set up the context, that the students are thinking about vocabulary related to camping, what's their knowledge of camping. So they're getting into the mindset of being able to listen more successfully when they get to so also they're predicting the content, and then of course check what do you have to do in the question. And this is something that students obviously need to be aware of. They look at the question carefully. They will see they need to look for a date, a number, and a name. And of course, if they look carefully at the questions, they can start to predict whether it's going to be a date, a number, or a name. Now, if you have students, lower level students, or students perhaps with dyslexia, one of the first stages you can do is actually give them an option. So you, as a kind of step by step so that they gain confidence. So you give them 2 possible answers for the gap, and they have to listen and choose the correct one. So that's also another way to stage it in the early stages. Of course, if you get the same sort of task at B2, and it's just showing it's not just a question of level. Again, students are going to predict the same kind of, sorry, I took that way too fast, same kind of thing. They need to think about the topic before they listen. Perhaps they might decide without or away from the exam question completely. They may, you could say to them, okay, we're going to listen to something about puffins. 3 questions that you would like answered, and tell me 3 things that you know already about puffins. Now listen to the task, and let's see if any of the 3 things that you know was mentioned, and if any of the 3 questions that you asked were answered. So let's go to another task type. This time we're looking at part 4, as you can see on the screen. And what we have to do here, we've got 5 conversations here separately. You'll see the similar task again at B1 and B2. So you'll have these tasks, as I said, aligned across. We're going to be actually, this is testing gist. And I also identifying opinion and agreement can come into this as well. So the actual skills that we need to show are gist and also identification of opinion, etc. So let's have a look at how we could think about preparing for that. So what does the task require? You have to choose the correct answer, listen to the context. The context is given to you, and then you have to choose the correct answer in answer to the question. They're separate, although they're about a similar context, in this case, teachers and talking. So what can you do? Instead of going straight into the exam question, let's do some of that those pre-listening tasks. Make sure that we look at what we're using pictures like this. And this is a downloadable lesson plan that we'll be able to give you access to after this session. It's a new one. So you get the students to think about what what people are talking about in these situations. You could perhaps elicit in the group, or if you want to do it, you could also use a Padlet and ask the students to go onto this Padlet. In fact, that QR code would take you onto the Padlet if you're interested. And you would ask the students to write their comments on there, guess who the people are, what are they talking about and why. Encourage them to be a little bit creative, a little bit imaginative. So once you've kind of got them into the idea of the topic, we can, sorry, I'll go back one. We can listen to the task, to the audio, and the task would be listen and identify which picture is being spoken about, and you'll find one has no picture. And so you have to listen out for the one that's not there. That's the first stage. And then the second stage is to actually give them some scaffolding. And again, this idea of scaffolding listening so that they gain confidence is very important. Here you can see that they have to listen and identify who, what, and why. And they're given this little framework to help them with the listening here. And as I said, you'll be able to download this material and use it yourself. Once we've done that task, of course, we can use the tape script and get the students to look at those questions and how did they choose it. So if we look, we've got the question why, and we can find in the tape script the words which actually showed. I'm afraid you need to is obviously giving bad news. So again, we start to see the connection between the tape script. So they're not able to word spot because, of course, they have to, this is, if you like, they have to understand the context of giving bad news. What kind of things would you hear if somebody was giving you bad news? And, of course, this tape script will help them focus on that. The other thing you can do when you're doing this task, if you don't have the possibility to do all the things that I've just mentioned, is very simply is to get the students to cover up the answers and try and think about the context. What do they think they would hear before they actually look at the options? Perhaps they could create some options. And then, of course, we can look at the options and do the task. Now, one little thing I wanted to mention, because many of you may have heard of Jigsaw reading tasks, but perhaps it's not so common to do Jigsaw listening. So I think it's a task which is worth considering. And basically, you get your students to listen to different tasks and come back together. So, for example, you have Group A and Group B, and Group A listen to one talk, and Group B listen to another talk. Now, you might do this at home, for example, so that they prepare to come and for the next lesson, they go to the breakout rooms and they can talk about what they've listened to, make comparison. Very nice, perhaps for B1 type activity and B2, where maybe they are listening to a slightly longer text. So very simple. You can also do it like this. So this is an example from B2 first, where there is what is called a multiple matching. So you've got to listen to 5 short extracts in which teenagers are talking about their hobbies. You may not be able to read it on the screen very well. And you allocate a different speaker to each student or group so that they focus on that particular part of the listening. And you can send it to them, perhaps on a Padlet, something like this. So you've got the 5 speakers, and they say, okay, you listen to number 3, you listen to number 4, and then they can come back and talk about it. Perhaps a little bit more involving than obviously when they're actually doing the exam task, which they need to be able to do, but before they get there. So let's stop. So we've looked at listening skills a little bit, talking about preparing using some of the new lesson plan material, which I hope you will find useful. And it's being released. New stuff is being released all the time at the moment. So I'll show you where to get those in a moment. So let's see how we can find activities and resources that you can use to continue that development. So there's a little section here which we can spend some time looking at some of those resources here. There is a new part on the Cambridge Assessment English website called Supporting Every Teacher. This was set up specifically with the coronavirus crisis so that teachers can get resources free, quickly and easily. And many of them are also it's possible for you to use online in your online classroom, and the material is free. So I think that's quite important. The QR code will take you there directly. Once you scroll down from that first part of the website, you'll get a little menu of options, and one of the ones that if you start with the one on the left, so that you can't see it very well, this is free teaching resources. It will take you to a section specifically for teaching with resources. Many of them are related directly to the Cambridge English qualifications, and certainly all of them will help you prepare. You will be given another choice, and what you have to do is select the exam, and you've got a little drop-down menu. You select the exam, and then you would choose the resource. In this case, I'm recommending that you select the lesson plan section. Now, then you will see, it will find them for you, and you click on it, and it will give you a list of lesson plans. Now, these are lesson plans. Some of them are specifically designed to help with teaching online, and some of them are also for teaching in standard classroom. So you possibly can see that this is one of the new ones, which is actually an integrated skills lesson, so it's listening and speaking, and you can see in the rubric that it's development of listening skills, but can be used online and offline. And it will also give you the aims, so that you have a clear idea of what this lesson is focusing on, what skills it's focusing on. And it has lesson stages, which can be used in a standard classroom, but also there are some suggestions for how you might vary that to do it offline as well. Sorry, not offline, remote teaching. Now, I wanted to show you this one because it's using a free resource called TED-Ed, if you haven't used it. This is great because there are lessons that have been created on different topics. So it's also quite useful if you're doing CLIL. So, for example, this is the history of chocolate, and there's the history of cheese and things like that. It gives you a lesson plan. This particular one is focusing on B1 preliminary for schools, as you can see, and it has notes for teachers. And on the website TED-Ed, it also has quizzes as well, so you've got extra materials. But this particular lesson plan takes you through that, guides you through it, and shows you where the resources are, so you're not trying to find them. It's important to encourage our students to work alone and to listen, as also to listen by themselves. But I think it's also important to give them some guidance about how to listen on their own. And this particular lesson plan that you'll be able to download focuses on B2, but it helps the students develop a strategy for how they might approach other listening texts as well, and also gets them to think about the requirements of the listening tasks in the exam. So it encourages them to get to know the exam. And as you can see here, it also encourages them to focus on language work as well, so giving an opinion. And of course, giving opinions is an important lexical set, or the lexis around this section is important also for the speaking as well as the listening and for the writing. So you've got these wonderful ways of developing your skills here. So the supporting every teacher page also has, as you can see above my purple circle, you also has access to other webinars. So there've been a lot of webinars, and you can listen to recordings of the webinars and find other resources in that section there. So there's lots of choice, and the supporting teachers pack for teachers has been specially created. It's amazing. It's an interactive PDF. And it means you don't have to hunt around the website to find resources. You can go to the level that you're interested in, whether that's young learners. So we haven't really been speaking about young learners today, but there are also pages on the young learners where you'll find lesson plans and resources for that. But you'll find lesson plans, flashcards, posters, lots of things. So definitely go and explore that one. And there are also, it will give you access to tools for your students to use, including listening materials as well. There are two really super websites here. One's called Practice. So after my story of Pavarotti, Practice Makes Perfect, lesson plans produced by Cambridge University Press. And you can choose lesson plans which focus on listening. And again, it will look at how the objectives to the listening and how you can develop your students' listening skills. And extra special at the moment are free downloads of an exam preparation on a book called Exam Boosters, where you can download the actual listening, the audio. Obviously, you can download the exam tasks, and of course, that gives you extra practice. They're available at all the levels listed there, at the moment, it's available free, so that's really exceptional. So definitely get that now if you can. So really, I've really almost come to the end of what I was going to say to you. I do hope that that we stopping to think about the challenges, reminding ourselves as teachers why is listening such a special skill. Of course, you can't hold on to it. It's there and it's gone. So, but you can play it again. You can let your students choose how many times they listen to it. So the challenges also mean that we can turn them into opportunities to help guide our students to know more about how listening works, how they can develop a particular skill, and the strategies that they need to use in the different parts of a Cambridge English qualification. Obviously by supporting them at the beginning of the course so that they learn about the exam strategies. When they get nearer to the exam, then using a whole exam paper may be useful practice so that they're prepared. But certainly using practice tests as learning tools and not just testing tools is a very important thing to do. We've had a look at some of the exam tasks. I'm afraid we couldn't look at every single level in detail, but I hope it's being able to get you to think about the fact that Cambridge English qualifications do test a range of listening skills, and you can see the information in the handbooks for teachers. They will see in each part of the listening test there is a breakdown, what's being tested, and of course we've been looking at some of those resources that you can get for free and hopefully will support you in your preparation for exams. Now, I don't know if we have any questions, Donya.
Hello. Hi, Sarah. Thanks very much. Could we ask you now, please, to post any questions that you have in the chat box? Post any questions that you have for Sarah, and we'll see if we can answer them now. I have one from earlier in the webinar. So there was a question about doing listening activities that aren't for the whole class to listen to at the same time. How can a teacher set this up in the lesson? or would it take part after the lesson?
It could take part of the lesson if you're in a situation where you have breakout rooms. So you could actually send the task or give the task and then put your students into a breakout room so that they can work perhaps collaboratively on the task. If that's not possible for you, then obviously you might get them to do it asynchronously and then come back and talk about it as a class, because I appreciate not everybody has the option of breakout rooms.
Okay, thank you. And somebody's asked about what about different accents in listening?
Okay, well, of course, it's important that we do hear different accents. And in Cambridge English qualifications, you will find there are different accents. So you'll hear a little bit of a Scottish or American as well as British English. Just to say that the accents that are used are comprehensible. They're not kind of difficult Cockney accents. Of course, they're comprehensible. And it is important that we do listen to a range of different accents. And a good course book, and many of you may be using some of the Cambridge University Press preparation materials for the exams, do have a range of accents so that your students also get to hear different voices, which is natural, of course, in life and important.
Absolutely. Okay, and then one last question. We have a comment. I like to show my students short TV programs to help them with their listening. Do you think this is a good idea?
Yes. Now, we didn't actually speak about that because, of course, I've been doing audio rather than we spoke very briefly about using video. Absolutely, I do think it's a good idea. If depending on the task that you give them, obviously you have to make sure it's appropriate for their level. But yes, because especially if it's something they're interested in listening to, they're going to be much more motivated. The images that you have with video, of course, will help support listening. And that's an important strategy to use. And as you see, we turn that visual, the lack of visual in the Cambridge English qualification to actually using the question paper as your visual as much as possible. So absolutely, yes, great.
Thank you very much. I think that's all of the questions that we have. So thank you very much, Sarah.
Right, thank you very much. And thank you to everyone for joining us. And we look forward to you joining us again for reading is the next one, I believe, isn't it, Donia? Yeah. So do have a look on the website and sign up for the next session. And thank you very much indeed for joining us today. And thank you to the team for the support that they have given me during the webinar. Thank you. And I'll say goodbye. Thank you.